Are you an entrepreneur who's interested in fundraising? I brought together John Yates and Sig Mosley, the godfather of angel investing, for a conversation for first-time entrepreneurs in their fundraising, loaded with great stories and great information. Enjoy. Welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. Today's guests are Sig Mosley and John Yates, two good friends and two servants in our Atlanta technology community. Our topic today is really the first-time entrepreneur's guide to fundraising. Why this topic now? Fundraising is an evergreen topic. Entrepreneurs with great ideas are popping up all the time. As tech moves forward and our economy grows, there are new problems that need to be solved and big money to be made solving those problems. The issue is it takes money to get a business off the ground. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Mosley is the godfather of the Atlanta angel investing community. He's invested in literally hundreds of deals over his 32-year career as an angel and also as a VC. And he was the lead investor on most of those deals. John Yates is an icon in Atlanta tech and partner with Gunderson Dettmer, international law firm. John built one of the biggest legal tech-focused practices in the Southeast. John's clients include the most successful startups and the highest profile entrepreneurs in the Southeast area. He is the entrepreneur's attorney and investor's attorney, and he is the greatest connector ever. His network is the who's who in tech, literally from coast to coast. So today's conversation is focused on early stage fundraising. I'll moderate. Sig will be representing the investor's side of fundraising, and John will be representing the entrepreneur's perspective. Today, we're going to cover 4 questions, and I'm sure we're going to go deeper on each one of these. But first, should you raise money? Secondly, how do you raise money? Third, what does it take to get a deal done with investors? And lastly, is your house in order legally speaking? So let's get started. Welcome, Sig and John. I'm so glad that you take the time to join us here and to help our entrepreneur community.
Happy to do it, Charlie.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
You guys are great.
Two fine fellas.
All right. So my job is just, I'm going to be the moderator here. I'll get us going with some questions. But one of the, I'm an angel investor also, for those who don't know me. I've been doing it I did it for 30 years. And now I've kind of hung up my spikes, if you will. But the first question in raising money is really, should a company raise money? And it's come up to me a few times. I have people that come, a lot of times, I should say, a lot of people come up to me and say, I got an idea, I want to raise money. And you go, I don't know about that. What are your thoughts when you get a client like that approaches you, John, and says, I got this idea. It's time to raise money. What do you tell them?
It's a great question. I tell them to come to Sig and Charlie.
Yeah. Immediate delegation. That's great. And we got to tell them it's not right. Is that it?
Actually, it sort of falls. The initial decision process is probably, are they experienced serial entrepreneur that have done it before?
Mm-hmm.
And that I believe if I were an investor that I would be interested in the idea. Are they fresh out of the box and wide-eyed but haven't really put together a true business, haven't determined whether the market's there, in which case my role is really more to pay it forward and to give them guidance to prepare them before they take your time and Sig's time and other folks' time, where they may lose the opportunity to really have a meaningful discussion. So that's the first decision making I go through, which is what's their level of sophistication, and that will dictate the direction that I might send them.
Yeah. And what's the level of sophistication maybe for one of these? Let's talk to first-time entrepreneurs, okay? Is, we see in these incubators, we're not measuring this, it seems, the success of businesses. We're measuring whether or not they raised money. That's the success. But, what investors are looking for is to invest in businesses that are going to provide returns. So when a first-time entrepreneur, where do you get to? You say you try to guide them along. Is there a point where it's type of business or something else where you say, you're getting closer, okay? Or now's the time.
So I see for this first time entrepreneur, I generally see them in three categories. One is the person that's been in big business before. They've done well, but they've been in a large company, and now they come out and they say, I've got this great idea and I want to go out and start the business. So they're an experienced business person, but maybe not an experienced entrepreneur. Right. And sometimes those are the toughest ones to deal with because they're used to having all sorts of support around them, and they think they've got all the answers and they don't. So we see a lot of those folks, though, especially when they're layoffs, when they're forced retirements. So they're a very tough crowd. I think Sig would probably agree. I don't know, Sig, do you feel that way?
Oh, yes. No, they are, and they have no idea what they're trying to do.
Why do you say that, Sig?
Well, they don't, because they have
These experienced executives.
Well, yeah, they are at Syria. We're having 40, 70 people who work for them, who are there to do everything. They probably have 2 or 3 secretaries. They have an admin or so, and they are good at being, where they are a marketing person or whatever they are. They're great at that, as long as they have a support mechanism around. I got a great example. I have a CEO who I love and love working with. Came out of MSA. I won't put him in a company with less than $10 million in revenue, because I know he has to have 10 to 12 people around him to be able to function. He does a great job at it, but he has to have that support mechanism. So for somebody like that, to put them in a early stage company, they won't succeed. They will just fail.
Okay, so that's you're telling us. It's between us guys here. Okay, so what do you tell them? This is where John is in this. I don't want to lose a client. I want to be encouraging, but
I don't worry about losing a client.
I know you don't. Okay. So what do you tell them?
I do. I tell them. I have told many IBM executives that you don't need to be an entrepreneur. And my basic question is, how much money do you need to live on every year? And when they come back and tell me they need $300,000 to $400,000 a year in cash, I tell them, well, you aren't going to get that entrepreneur, and you need to go find a big job.
That's really good. And John, you were framing this well. You said there's 3 kinds. Okay, so the first one was these experienced business people, right? From executives, if you will. What else? What are the other 2 categories?
Let me go to the other polar extreme. I had a situation the other day, fresh out of the box. A friend of mine said, will you please talk to my daughter? She's got this really great idea, and she's in school. And she's at this school that might be close by. It might be a technical school, a technology school. He said, talk to my daughter. I said, great, I'll be happy to talk to your daughter. But I'll tell you, I've talked to your daughter types before who are entrepreneurs, and I'm assuming you want your daughter to graduate from this school. Is that correct? In other words, you don't want her to drop out. And he said, that's correct. I want her to graduate. And I said, well, I just want to make sure of that, because the people that I speak with in this environment where they're a junior and, at, let's say, a big tech institution, and they have some great idea, like this person I was talking to, she just had this wonderful idea. And her big problem was that she was getting all these checks and getting all this money transferred to her, and she didn't have enough time to develop the product. And she never mentioned going to school, by the way. So it was just like, what do I do? I mean, I've got this great idea, but I like to program and I really need a development team. And it's like, so she wants to be an entrepreneur. I guess you could say she's passed one test because people are paying for what she's developed. But the rest of it is like completely, a wide open field for her. So, what do you do in a situation like that? Unlike the executive that Sig and I were talking about, who thinks they know it all, this person knows they don't know anything, except they know how to code and they know how to use generative AI, and they really got something that a lot of people are buying now, and it's just like a wide open opportunity.
So what do you do with that young lady? Did you talk to her, or you just told her father the qualifying question, if you wanted to graduate, you'll kill this, okay? What did you do?
That's right. I told her it was a terrible idea and she got to go back to the books. No, I didn't tell her that. What I did was I put her in touch, in this case, with CreateX. I said, you need to go to talk to somebody at
Ah,
who can help tie you in to this university, into the system. In other words, find somebody that's speaking your language. And I know you
mhm.
and Sig know all about CreateX and the great work that is being done there by Raul. And so that was, I could explain to her there's a lot that she has to go through to find somebody to come in and help her run her company, or to find a development team. It wasn't going to work out of her dorm room, right? She needed to go and talk to somebody that could help. And I think, Sig, that's what CreateX helps.
They're right, it does. Great opportunity for people to get an education and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it is, because I think what happens, I agree with that, is that's one of the issues. Like you said, she knew nothing, right? That the process was, she was blind to ignorant of the process and what's involved. And and what we hear is, I want to be Mark Zuckerberg, I want to be Bill Gates, right? I want to be Steve Jobs, I want to be whoever else it is, that went, or Chris Klaus, at Georgia Tech. They dropped out and created a $1 billion company. Why can't that be me? So I think getting them into a process like CreateX, and they say, well, oh, I see what's involved, I see what I don't know, and this is brings them to reality.
So, Charlie, if you'd like, I can share the third, which is the most common.
Yeah.
Okay, so I call this the overly excited entrepreneur. And I give you an example. So I was giving a speech at a business school one time here in town, and I was talking about what early stage entrepreneurs need to do in growing companies. And there was this guy in the back of the room. There's always a guy in the back of the room, right? He's got his hand up the whole time. He's questioning everything. You and Sig have seen this. It's the guy that just jumping out of his chair, just has, this guy's got a new business in his head, right? He just can't wait to tell you about it. Of course, we didn't call on him when he was there, but he was the first guy down. He comes in, he says, I got this new idea for a company. It's unbelievable. I've been working at this other place. I said, fantastic. Tell me a little bit about yourself. He said, well, my wife's 8 months pregnant. I quit my job. I got this new great idea. I haven't written a business plan yet, but boy, it's going to be a real winner. So I knew that this guy was the kind of guy I wanted to have as a client.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
This guy, he put it all on the line. And so, there was no going back, man. He was walking down that bridge, and he's either going to fall off, or he was going to be building it as he went. And sure enough, he ended up building this company. We ended up raising some money. Didn't turn out exactly the way he wanted to, but he did really, really well. But the key element that I was looking for in that case was he really knew he knew where he was going. He had a good idea, and he was all in. There was no turning back. It wasn't like the senior executive that tells Sig and me one day after he's spent Sig's time and my time, and we've run up some legal fees, and he says, "Oh, by the way, I decided to go back to work for IBM." It's like,
Yeah.
or the young entrepreneur that said, decides that she quit school, but the thing, she falls on her face and she's got to go back and live at home or something. We'll still help her out.
Yeah.
But this person, they are all in and focused. So there's a lot of folks that fall into that category.
Yeah, but a lot of people in that category are also like, they send them to CreateX or do something with them, okay, so that they understand what they're faced with, okay? They kind of pull the trigger a little too soon. But Sig, what is it from an investor standpoint? What do there's other things, just from a readiness. There's also the type of business maybe that you look at other elements, if you will, or evaluate other characteristics, if you will, as to whether this fella should, or this fella or gal should raise money.
Well, first you have to begin with looking at the market. What is the size of the market? It needs to be a large market for it to be something that can be fundable. Then within that, you got to look at the problem that they say they're going to solve. Is it a problem that people want to solve in that large market? Because you can have a large market, but if you're solving a problem that people don't care about, it doesn't matter. So you got to get over that. And then you had to figure out, well, is the right person? John had mentioned, does he have the credibility or whatever to do it? A first-time entrepreneur, you're probably not going to have a lot of background on him, but you do what you can. You talk to him, you figure out what he can and what he knows, what he doesn't know. Has he gotten anybody besides himself involved with it? When it is a tech startup, I'm a big believer that you need two co-founders. You need the business person and you need the technical person, and he is just on one side of it. I had, a guy, a business person say, I can market this, I know how to sell. Well, my first question is, well, how do you build it?
Yeah. What about the progress question though? You hadn't brought that up, as a characteristic. What progress have they made? Because everybody's like, first thing they want to do is, oh, well, I got a business plan put together and I got a pitch deck, so I should raise money. You say,
Well, but
what?
that is where you come to when you find out where now he has a technical partner or not. If they know technical partner, where are you in the product development?
What about a client that's paying money,
Now,
as opposed to, I know everybody's going to buy it. The other side is, I've got 5 people that bought it.
well, I ain't gotten to that point yet because I had to get to the point that are they a product there? Who developed the product? Did you pay for it overseas, or did somebody here do it at night? And then you have to figure out, well, who owns the product and how complete is the product, and
I got it.
all of that. Then you still got to get comfortable that you can work with the person. Because it's important that as an investor, I feel good about working with the entrepreneur. And then if you can get through all of that, then you can begin to ask about, how is it in beta? Do you have beta customers? All of the, and then at some point you ask, do you have a company? And if you don't have a company, that is one of my early principles, and I say this even with John on the call, go find yourself a good early stage lawyer, because you've got to set up your company right. You got to set up all the documentations and all the program right. And if you don't, it's going to cost you a lot more money in the end.
What does that mean to me when John? What does it mean when he says? So somebody comes to me
Well,
and comes to you and says, "Hey, John, this SIG guy, who's the Godfather angel investor, and he said I need to talk to you about doing it right."
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I do in that scenario is, and Sig and I have been through this back and forth about 1,000 times. And Sig, I appreciate you sending people to me, and every once in a while, it might not be able to help, and vice versa. But it's great to know that there's people like you and Charlie around to help give honest feedback.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that I do, even before I give the legal answer, Charlie and Sig, is I say, can you send me your executive summary? And I figured if they don't have an executive summary, it's like, let me send you a template that I've got. And I'll even send you a link to some of the samples, the early executive summaries from LinkedIn and Uber and Airbnb, which are all online, the PowerPoints. Take a look at those and send me back your executive summary in that format. And it doesn't mean, by the way, a 15-page document that has all sorts of demographic information that's not relevant. But let's assume that they send me an executive summary that makes some kind of sense. And they say, Sig says, I need to set up a company. Oftentimes what I'll say, well, what kind of company did he want you to set up? Did he say an LLC? Did he say a C Corp? I know he didn't say an S Corp. I know he didn't say a traditional partnership. And then I'll ask, when do you think in this scenario you're going to be raising institutional money? In other words, rather than just friends and family and people that may be looking for potentially to take tax losses and the like, which could flow through in an LLC, versus, hey, look, I'm going to go off and I want to raise from just a few people, and I want to try to raise institutional money pretty fast, in which case a C corporation is generally what we'll suggest. That also gives them an advantage of so-called 1202 stock, which is the small business stock that if it's held long enough can end up with some significant tax advantages. So you have to ask sort of a series of questions to get to the right answer and explain to them the various repercussions. And Sig, I don't know, you probably go through that same drill too with folks.
Well, I do, because you have to figure out, if I'm going to tell them they need angel money versus VC, or if they look at, as you say, the VCs. But then at the same time, I also look at, if you're going to be your friends and family around, should they look at a convertible note or should they look at a SAFE agreement? Because is it time to really sell equity yet? Or would they be better off with the note or the SAFE agreement? So that adds to the complexity of it.
What is it? This is something I was wondering with you, John, is there are consequences for the founder or the entrepreneur in raising money that, it's almost like, I got a great idea. I'm going to raise money and, everything stays the same. What do you tell them? This is the personal side of this thing to say, let me tell you what you're doing here, what you're about to get involved in and how it's going to impact you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about an example, and frequently when I'm talking to folks about who want to raise money, let's just say, for example, you talk about friends and family. I will ask them, well, have you put together a list? Who's on your list?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a really short list and they're planning to raise from friends and family, it really creates a real challenge, because the likelihood of then being able to raise smart money from those friends and family is pretty limited. They're going to get people, especially if they have rich relatives who are just going to put money in this thing. It's really not a good direction to start out. On the other hand, if they're thinking about raising institutional money, frankly, I consider SIG's money friendly institutional money, right? Or if they're going to,
That's what you would call the professional angel class, if you will. Okay.
Exactly. In that situation, making sure they understand and talk to that person about what life is like after receiving the money. And SIG is, people like you and SIG and others are very candid about it. I mean, you don't mix, you're not sitting there sugarcoating it. You say, look, this is what I'm expecting. I expect board meetings at this frequency. I expect this kind of reporting. I expect these kind of KPIs that you'll provide. And if they're going right to a venture capitalist, an institutional fund, I explain to them that they really need to go and talk to references and a lot of companies that the venture investors invested in, because I am pretty clear about the fact that it's probably easier to divorce your spouse than it is your venture capitalist. So once you get into this thing, you are really in it. And it may be that at some point you're not in it, but it's not because you didn't want to be. It's because you got shoved out of it. And
yeah, that's
somebody
the other
else
side.
came in to take your place. So we go through that kind of sort of psychological discussion in advance to say, is this really what you want to do? Because this is what life's going to be like after you do it.
And say, from an investor standpoint, I mean, that's great coaching, which is so true, because it seems like it's free. I get money, people make money, and, I do whatever I want, run my company. John's pretty clear. It's like, wait a minute, you might want to think about these things, and the other one, which is friends and family, yeah, it's easier to raise money from friends and family, but do you really understand that if this thing doesn't go well, every Thanksgiving, you're going to be looking across the table at the friends and family. Are they psychologically set for that, and how will that impact you long term? These are discussions that need to be had. But what about you, Sig?
I held the same.
You say, hey, let me tell you about what it means to raise money. This is what's going to happen to you.
I held the same discussion that John does.
Okay.
Because I want to be sure that they know what they're getting into, because otherwise they aren't going to be a happy camper down the road, and you don't like unhappy entrepreneurs running the company.
Do you tell them about that sort of, you take my money, you're in it, you and I are sort of locked at the shoulder for a very long time?
Well, yeah, in fact, I used the same analogy that John used. I'm a little more blunt about it. I say, when you take my money, you have married me and you ain't getting rid of me. So, I'm pretty blunt about that and have been for years, because they need to understand that once they start taking angel and VC money, they are locked in. Now, friends and family, how much you locked into them depends on the friends and family, and I try not to get deep into that, because I don't want to know. If they got family that going to put money in, the only thing I want to know is how much of it is your money. Because you want to know how much the entrepreneur is putting in, because the entrepreneur has too much money of his own that he can put into it. Sometimes he makes some poor decisions, right, because it's his money, and he'll say, it's my money, I don't care. I want to know that up front going in to see whether or not I'm going to have to have that conversation one day. But if it's friends and family, they're going to give him $1 million. Well, if they give him that kind of money, he probably doesn't need my money anytime soon. So let him go through the friends and family, and then he can come back and talk to me.
Yeah, I
Charlie,
think the biggest. Yeah, go
can I
ahead,
jump in
John.
on something, Charlie? I'm
Yeah,
sorry
yeah.
for interrupting. This is one of the big issues that can be a death knell obstacle, and that is the friends and family who come in and have this ultra high valuation for this entrepreneur.
Mm.
Somehow they believe what he's saying or she's saying, even though there's really no reason to believe it, but they don't have experience. And then we end up inheriting this. We're talking to the company as lawyers, and they're saying they want to raise capital, and there's not even an executive summary, and they've got a $50 million pre-money valuation because Uncle George thought it was a fantastic idea, but didn't know anything about it, and it creates huge problems. And it's one of those things where we know that even if it's a great idea, we're going to have to go unravel this thing. And we just hope that Uncle George and our entrepreneur clients stay on good terms, and that Uncle George understands that we need to change things because it just is a big turnoff, and
Well,
especially
it's
in
a
the
big
industry.
turnoff also, the entrepreneur. Uncle George, he's probably going to wind up with more equity. The entrepreneur is going to get crucified on something like that,
Yeah, which is why the
because
venture guys look at it and say, look, the entrepreneurs are not getting enough out of this. You got to go back and fix this thing, and
no,
it's
it's terrible.
never
Yeah,
easy.
it is terrible. So if I decide I am going to raise money, I understand now. I am the right company. I am at the right stage. I have a team built. I'm doing this thing. Who do I talk to for advice? Because again, this is first timers, right? You could just think about it. I got something here, and now I want to go. And I'm some company up in Alpharetta. I'm not part of the ATDC or the ATV or going to all the meetings that a lot of these young entrepreneurs go to. I'm just built something. I seems like Sig thinks I got something, and John thinks I got something. How do I proceed? What kind of who are some good advisors, or where can I find advisors to kind of bring me along so that I don't look stupid when I get in front of the first investor?
That is a John Yates conversation. No, I tell all my entrepreneurs, your attorney should be telling you things. Your attorney should be advising you. Your attorney should be educating you. Now, I don't mean to pass the buck, John, but he won't. He needs somebody that is on his side to be talking to him. I can't be on his side because I had to protect my money and where it's going. So the attorney or his accountant or somebody who knows what they're talking about that he is close to, or that in the case of the attorney, he employed the attorney. So the attorney works for him. That is who he should be talking to. Don't go talk to your Uncle Harry or whoever, because who knows. I had one entrepreneur that he listened to his dad more than he listened to his attorney or to me, and it got him in trouble.
Yeah, I think we were in a deal like that.
Well, we did have one like that. I had an even worse one, Charlie. So
Oh, you did? Oh,
yeah,
good for you. Well, I won't allow you to recount that. So I'll bear, I'll spare you the pain of that. But what about this question about, we're just about to get into the next question, was how do you raise money? But the first question just before we hit those steps of how we raise money or how you advise them, the steps they'll go through in raising money, is how do you decide how much? I've never raised money before. I got something. How much?
well, one, you had to have a business plan. And as part of that business plan, you do have to make projections.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I tell people I don't believe in projections because, well, Charlie, can you tell me who you're going to get
No, no,
revenue
no.
from?
When you started talking about projections, I said, I'm saying to myself, Sig always says he doesn't believe projections.
Yeah.
Why is he telling me that he wants this guy to do projections?
Well, you got to go through the exercise to just look at it. But to me, the business model is more important. You got to be able to have a sustainable business model that will work in the market that you're in. And when you have that, then you can try to figure out what it's going to take you to get to certain milestones along the way.
Okay.
If you are in the very early stage and you're building product, you may take a friends and family or early angel round, that as an investor, I will want you to get to probably a minimum valuable product and how will be a customer too. So then
Okay.
I had to sit down with the entrepreneur and talk him through how long will that take? How
Mm-hmm.
much, what all is he going to need? And then try to come up with a number that makes sense to get him there. Now, if it's going to take him $3 million to get there, that's going to be a big initial
Yeah, I
round and
get that.
probably will have to be broken down into multiple parts. Because what you don't want as an investor is for him to raise a certain amount of money with certain goals and get halfway there and be out of money. Because
Oh,
as an investor, you know who he coming back to, you, for more money.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
and
Well,
I
what about
tell
you, John? Do you have that too? Do you just kind of push it off and say, I'm not a financial guy. I'm not that deep into your business. The how much question, you need to talk to Charlie and Sig or whomever else. Do you do that, or do you actually help them with the how much question?
If they're really green, I may just send them right to you guys to say, look, you need to get the advice from a Charlie or Sig. But oftentimes, what we'll have is they'll come in and they'll be the West Coast mentality, which is I want to raise a boatload of money and do this as fast as I can. I think I've got the right thing here. And every once in a while, there's somebody that does. And we say, man, you got something that's really so. And we will because our law firm was founded in Silicon Valley, and we've got 500 plus funds that we've got connections to. I'll say, okay, you know, let me talk to the folks. We'll see if Andreessen Horowitz and Excel and Benchmark can talk to you. That, of course, is the rarity, but every once in a while it happens. And let's call that a special unicorn because that really is at that point. In other instances, it's interesting. What we'll say is, tell me about it. What are you going to use the money for? What's the use of proceeds section look like, so to speak? And get them to walk through what those items are. And one thing we do know that you and Sig and other angels, super angels, and venture investors have is you got a return on investment threshold that you're looking at. And so if they're either way under it or way over it, it probably doesn't fit for you guys. So we may not know exactly what it is, but we have a pretty good idea of the range.
Yeah.
And so we'll say, look, you're trying to raise $15 million right now off of a 2-page executive summary. Sounds really interesting, but you have nobody else interested. That's not going to work. Another factor we're asking about is who else has expressed an interest, and we're trying to get genuine interest.
Mm.
Not somebody, not my, Uncle George told me it was a great idea, and he's a used car salesman, and he thinks this is fantastic. But if they say, look, I've been talking to these companies contacted me, like the woman I was talking about earlier in the dorm, she said, all of a sudden, all these people have been contacting me. So I know there's authentic demand. At least I'm perceiving there is. And so in that instance, it's like she needed a development team. She needed lots of things. So she's going to need to raise more capital. As Stig says, maybe it's in tranches. We try to get an idea of, is this really a business? There's authentic demand. And does the ideal client profile look like one that's truly viable and a big enough market for a Sig and Charlie? So we're asking a lot of questions, sort of yes, no questions to get down to a point of saying, okay, this is how much we think they ought to raise. Now go do the litmus test by talking to Sig and Charlie.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And it's it's interesting. All of this advice that we've had in this first segment, which is should I raise money, is every question that you guys are asking is pushing the entrepreneur's nose back into the business to say, tell me again how you're going to build this thing. Tell me what the next steps are. Tell me who you're going to hire. Tell me how you're going to get to that milestone. Tell me how you're going to get those first 2 customers. So they start getting pretty soon. It becomes very, very clear. This is about building a business. This is not about raising money. This is not about a cool product idea. It's about building a business that at some point is going to be self-sustainable with positive cash flow. Okay. That's what this is about, this process. So then you get to, okay, so we got all that. These guys were, John and Sig really helped me along. And by the way, Sig, I got to say that I've heard from so many different people that you've said no to that you stuck with and helped guide them along till you said yes to.
Yeah,
And that's just, I think that's very unusual about angel investors anywhere. And so that's what you've set that in our culture here in Atlanta, which thank you. But and John, you're always an encouragement. I wonder sometimes when you're encouraging me and I'm like, is he really think that way? Or are you just being nice? Anyway, this next one. So what are the steps? So I go like, I think I'm ready. And you say, I think you're ready too. And we seem to have a number in mind. So what steps do I have to go through in order to get investors interested so that we can sit down at the table and maybe cut a deal? What are those steps?
Sig pointed about the legal steps. Maybe I can start with that, Sig, as you pointed out. I mean, what they don't want to do is waste your time. So they've got to have the foundation set up. I would say that in 75% of the situations, not always, but 75% of the situations, it's a Delaware C corporation. And, it could be, and especially I see, some other states as well. Texas is obviously trying to get into the fray here. In some instances, Nevada, but the Delaware C raises the fewest questions. And the whole concept here is time is the enemy of the deal. The more time you spend and waste trying to figure out, having to reincorporate or change the structure, it costs money, it costs time. And, Sig is going to be, he has a limited amount of time. Charlie has a limited amount of time. They're going to get diverted someplace else. So you're going to lose their attention. So setting up as a Delaware C, and then thinking through the issues, who else is involved in this enterprise. All right. And then isolating the questions. Do they have family members involved? Is it a husband and wife contact? Is it a son-father context? What are the issues that we know are just that you guys as investors are going to ask and worry about? Not that you won't invest in the husband and wife, although you might not, but if it's the right combination, maybe you will, or a father-son. But we walk through those kinds of issues. And then basically say, look.
By the way, I just got to say that I think that's very important. I want to jump in on that. And I think maybe you too, Sig, is there's nothing worse than a hosed up cap table. Okay. Right. So I don't know if you got a comment on John's second step here.
Oh yeah. Well, even worse than that, I don't care where they're on the cap table or not. They in the company a problem.
Touche. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Okay.
Yeah, in doing my 200 deals, I have done one where they were a husband and wife combination. I turned them down. I turned down one.
And that was the first one, right?
No, that was a father and father-in-law. I mean,
that's what it was. It was an entrepreneur and father-in-law. Yeah,
but he wasn't really involved. He wasn't bored. He didn't. No, I turned down one about 2 years ago. It was a father and 3 sons in a business, and I liked the business. I thought they had a good business, but with that kind of combination, I won't touch it.
Got it. So we got our corporate structure, and we got our now we see who's involved, whether they're on the cap table or not. Where do you go from there, John?
Yeah, it's interesting. What I try to do at that point is I say, listen, I want to make sure before I put them in front of folks like you, where I've taken them on as a client. Now, if I haven't taken them on as a client, I'm basically going to send them back to do their homework. But let's assume they've done their homework. So we got an executive summary, and I say, come in and give me your pitch. Give me your pitch deck. Let's walk through it. And interestingly, the way I position this, and I'd be interested in your observations on this, I say, listen, now you've seen presentations before, but I want you to present it as if this is the first board meeting that you're presenting to your investors. All right. So you can use some adverbs and you can put, slides, but we don't want 15 slides telling about how wonderful you are and all the people and how wonderful your advisory council is. You got the new Pope is going to be on your advisory council or whatever. I said, get rid of all that stuff. You can get 2 slides of that stuff, right? And then get into the meat and potatoes. And what I really want to see is I want to see your pipeline. Because if they don't have a pipeline, and again, I realize it's not exact, but they should have an ideal client profile, and they should know like the top 5 or 10 customers they're going to go after, because that's where the investors can help them out. If they don't have the pipeline, then I know it's going to be very, very hard when they sit down and they're ask about, well, who are you going to sell to? So trying to get them to think like that first board meeting. And you guys know better than anybody. And for those people listening, I've been around the table with these two guys, and they're fantastic. But after about the first 5 minutes of being told about how wonderful the company is, they're going to politely inject in and say, show me the pipeline. Show me where what's the customer, who are you going to be selling it to? And so I try to get to that as fast as I can and prepare the company before I'm going to stick them in front of someone that I really think is capable of putting money in. Now, this may be different from the person that's not quite there yet, and they just need to hear the same thing from Charlie and Sig that they're hearing from me. But if I've already made the decision, I'm bringing them on. I want them to be put in front of you with their best foot forward.
I don't know. I'll tell you, John, I have never heard that before, that advice that you give. In other words, puts the deck together like you're presenting at the first board meeting. That creates a whole new line of thinking versus I'm putting a deck together to feature me, the team, and the company and the market, if you will, so that I get somebody to invest. It just really is. That's so valuable. I love that thought. What do you think, Sig?
Yeah, I have never heard it quite put that way, but that is it is an intriguing way, and it does add value, because one of the things that we do want to know as investors is who are your potential customers and where are you as far as getting there. Now, if you don't have the product built yet, that might be a little premature. It depends on where you are in your product life cycle.
I agree with that. The one thing too, Sig, that I look for, even if they don't have the product yet, if they don't know who their first 5 potential customers prospective customers are going to go after, and I've had this many times, I know you guys have too. I say, well,
Yeah.
So what's that ideal client profile look like? They give me an idea of it. I say, well, I could think to myself, well, that's interesting. I said, so who would be your top 2 or 3 companies you'd like to pursue right away? And if they either don't know or they say, well, it's going to be IBM, AT&T, and the U.S. government.
And then walk away.
Yeah. So really getting to think, go back to the drawing board. Think about what's going to be like in that first board meeting. Because after 5 minutes, let me tell you, they're not going to want to hear any adverbs.
Yeah.
The superlatives go.
I was sitting in once on a pitch like that, and this was back in the .com days, where they said there's thousands of customers that we're going to have, thousands. And I never forgot this. One of the angel investors said, I'm very excited that there's going to be thousands of customers. Tell me how you're going to get the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I never forgot. And the guy went slack-jawed, It was like,
Because he had no idea.
just tell me one. I just want the first one, okay? So that's your point. But again, here we are saying, look, this is about building a business.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. So you're saying here that, okay, so we got our corporate structure right, we got a cap table, we got our executive summary, we got our pitch deck now put together, like it's the first board meeting, and maybe really get to the ground level with those first 5 customers so they're real to you. Then where do they go? Okay. I haven't talked to anybody yet except you, John. Okay. Where do I go now?
So you're saying they have their first 5, they have first 5 paying customers.
No. I just identified the first. You just told me you want me to tell you the first 5, and I said, okay, here they are.
Well, interesting. I also
and you didn't laugh me out of the room, okay?
No, I asked one other question. And this is interesting because I say, who is it within this? They show me the slide that shows who's on their team. All right, yeah. And it's like so I'm looking who's on their team and how committed are they right now to the team, right? If they're all working at a Fortune 500 company, they're not very committed, right? But let's assume, for the sake of this hypothetical, that they got 3 of them that are all in. I mean, they're just like the person I was talking about earlier, would raise his hand in the back of the room. They're in. Maybe their spouse is not 8.5 months pregnant, but I mean, they're all in. So then I asked the question, interestingly, especially if the founder is a technical person, I say, who is it that's going to wake up at 2 a.m. sweating the table, the pipeline, and having to close customers? And what I tell them is, I said, look, at Gunderson Detmer, that'd be me, right? So I'm waking up thinking, I'm thinking, how do I do that? Now, I say a prayer, and I know the good Lord's going to see fit to help me out. But I do wake up thinking, how am I going to close these deals? And if there's not somebody who's really thinking about it, I'm exaggerating, obviously. It may not be 2 a.m., but maybe it's 6 a.m. when you wake up, or 8 a.m. But there's somebody that knows how to sell that you've got factored into the equation.
It's not even how to sell. What you're saying, it needs to be somebody who feels the burden is theirs to sell.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well,
They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that come back to having a business person as a co-founder, because you don't have somebody that owns the business side. You don't know who is going to be that person that's going to wake up. That is that business person's responsibility. Now, he may have people under him selling and all that, but you got to have a business-oriented individual doing exactly what John said. And in a good early stage company, that will be your co-founder, because you need to have as much emphasis on the business as you do on the technical.
No, that does make sense. And, we're talking about being ready to raise money. So that needs to be in place, that co-founder, one of them that's going to be that business lead that's going to do that selling. But I always say, I deal with sort of back of the napkin sort of startups is what I was in there. And I would always say, even if it was a technical founder, I said, you're not only going to write the product, but you got to be the person selling the product. And, Chris Klaus, I interviewed him at one point at a podcast. Yeah. And he went out there and he was getting calls like in the dorm room, like this young lady. And he was going out and he said, I didn't know what to ask for money. They told me how much they'd give me for it. So I took it, and then eventually Tom came along, Tom Noonan, partnered with him. And then that's when Imlay got involved. That's when Kleiner Perkins or whoever, well, I think it was Kleiner that got involved and started putting in real money.
Right. But,
Charlie. So you're right. So I'm with you on that.
Right. But Chris.
Somebody's got to wake up every day going, I got to sell something.
Right. But Chris woke up to the fact that he didn't want to be that person.
He did.
And so he went out and found somebody. He took the proactive approach because he just knew that wasn't something he wanted to do.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't interesting, and he was clueless on it, and he figured out there must be other people that know this better than I do.
Yes.
So what else, John? So you got that. So John is sweating this morning. He's sweating before he goes to bed. I got to find a new deal. I love that, John.
Let me share another story that highlights what you just said too about finding. It doesn't have to be the founder. May not be a salesperson. May not come. Oftentimes it's a consultant. I remember one situation with a very successful technology company, still very successful today. I'm still glad I own some stock in this company. But the founder was from a consulting firm, and it's like I knew he was very energetic, but I said, well, how do you sell this thing? You're not a salesman. And the other three co-founders are all technology people. So, who's selling this stuff? He said, I know how to sell it. He said, I know everything about the market I'm in. I can walk into a company and I'm a consultant and I know where their problems are. And that's how I figured out how to write our product. And so I can go in, I'm their consultant, tell them what their problems are, do an assessment, which I charge a little bit for, right? To show value. And then I say, guess what? I got the product for you. I just happen to have this here in my bag. And so the guy, it was clear there was authentic demand. And it was like, boom. And that guy has been unbelievably successful over and over and over again.
How about that?
Because he knew the problem as a consultant, even though he wasn't a sales guy. But he came in there and said, these are things you can fix. And rather than being the consultant, said, you go fix these things. Good luck. Here's some vendors to go talk to. He said, I'm the guy you can talk to. And I got the product.
That's why it is so important. Sig and I talked about this, is that they know their industry and they know their customer, because customers or prospective customers, they want to talk to somebody and enjoy talking to somebody who understands their business. And you bring up an excellent example right there, John. Okay, so I still haven't talked to to a guy that's going to potentially be an investor. So, man, I'm all ready to go. What do I do next, John?
So here's what I try to do. I say, look, you need to talk to one or two friendly venture capitalists or angel investors. And the reason you need to talk to the friendly ones is because they're going to tell you how your baby is ugly, right? You need to know how your baby is ugly. Everybody's got an ugly baby. That's probably not a bad metaphor, but everybody does. You got to know what's wrong with this presentation, because if you go to Uncle Joe or you go, frankly, to somebody else that's a friend of mine, and I haven't set it up properly, they're going to nod their head. And when they see bad things are going on, unless they've been told in advance that we want to be told how our baby is ugly, they're going to be trying to be nice, And sometimes they'll try to be nice because they may think to themselves, this has got all sorts of problems on it, but it's possible it could be a success one day, and I don't want to be seen as a prospective investor to turn them off, so I'm just going to nod my head. Maybe they'll come back later. So I find one or two people that I
No,
know
that's what
will carry
VCs
on.
do. That's not what angels do.
Well, angels are different. Angels are different. You're right. But not all angels are different, but most of them. Yeah. So I'm looking for a couple that can be very honest and give them great feedback. It's a little bit like the preseason, right? Preseason, so they're refine the pitch, see how it's working. And then I go with a broader list. And frankly, it's really hard. It's really hard for me to sit there and critique their pitch and tell them where they need to change it. Because they view me as a lawyer, even though I have a fair amount of experience in the area. But when they hear it from you, Sig, or Charlie, it means a whole lot more.
So what do you give them if somebody says to you, say, from an investor standpoint, John's thought this thing through. I think he's probably done it a couple of times. But as an investor, what advice, when you see them flat-footed like that, but they got something, do you follow these same steps or?
Well, it depends. Sometimes, people will come to me wanting what John is recommending is a friendly investor to look and give comments. And I will do that, but I critique it the same way I was looking to invest in it. Even though I know I'm not, they aren't probably ready yet. But I give them that. But then if somebody has something, then I will try to I will meet with them more than once and try to work through the issues that I see. I'll give you a great example. The biggest issue I see that entrepreneurs don't know enough about their competitors. Because competitors come in two categories: who competing today and who will compete tomorrow. And if you haven't looked at that shows you don't know your market. And I point that out continually to people. And I don't hesitate to, because they need to be aware of that. And then I point out other issues in the deck. I'll point out where things are missing. Maybe they don't have financials in their deck, because not everybody does. Well, you got to have something. Sometimes they don't even put in a use of proceeds, or their business model. It's just so crappy done that it needs to be redone.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that happens, particularly, John, where you're talking about going to two friendlies, those first pitches, I think it's very important that the two friendlies work with you. I mean, you're the one that recommended you say, talk to Bill and talk to Joe, right? And that Bill and Joe get back to you, or you follow up with them. Because one of the issues from an angel standpoint does this entrepreneur really listen? Really listen, okay? Because you're picking two friendlies that have lots of experience. The people you respect and have done a lot of deals and seen a lot of deals, a lot of entrepreneurs. Does the entrepreneur listen? Boy, what do you do when the feedback is the guy's pitching? I was talking to him and he just kept saying, yeah, I know. What do you do then? Because now it's you don't want to put him out to the bigger, as you called it, the broader group, because now it's reflecting on you.
Yeah, that is a problem, and it happens. And hopefully, I've screened those people out before I took them on as a client. But,
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and it's there's some people you're just never going to change their ways, and they may be very successful, but they'll be very frustrating to deal with. And just as an aside, they may give you problems as angels, but they'll really give me problems as a lawyer when I tell them they can't. They're going to create liability issues, right? And I'm about to say, look, we can't do that. I can't do that legally, ethically. So I really got to try to screen them out earlier. It's interesting. I was just looking. I got an email today in a similar situation. I introduced a company to an angel. Obviously, won't mention any names. This person says, I met with them. They built a really functional and user-friendly technology. I still need to dig in a little bit more about the market, what they built. And, he said, I got some other issues that I'd like to talk to you about. Okay, so I sort of know what the issues are probably going to be.
Yeah.
but I can go back. I really do think these folks have a business. I think, well, I know they have a product. And so I have to go back and be very direct. And I think this is part of the benefit of being, maybe having a little bit of gray hair like the three of us have, where people will respect what we say. At least they'll listen to it. And when we say, look, I've been doing this a long time. This is the feedback I'm getting. Now, it may be different for you, but probably 95% of the time, it's going to be a problem. Maybe you're the 5% that's not going to be a problem. But assuming you're in that 95% category, there's some things you got to change,
Right.
and try to give them that advice. If they don't want to take it, they don't have to take it, but hopefully they will.
Is there anything in the, just jump back to the pitch deck for just a second, is there anything in the pitch deck that speaks to sort of the ask, if you will, for the investor? What I'm looking for.
Yeah. If I could back into the one thing I despise, that I think is terrible to have, and they spend way too much time, is they spend way all this time on this advisory council, all these other people that they know. It's like, get rid of all that stuff. I don't want to know, because I know more people than you know. So forget that. And so when they make the ask, it's really the idea. It's almost like the natural. It's like they don't have to make the ask, because it's going to be so apparent that you want to invest in them, that it's going to be, you almost don't make the ask. It's like you set up this beautiful picture. The prospective investor looks at it and says, I have got to get into this business. What you love is a situation where it's so beautifully set up, and then at the very end, it's sort of, you don't ever make the ask. You just say, hope you've enjoyed the presentation.
Yeah. Well, I like that, John. I think that's good. SIG is, when you think back on the more attractive deals that you've gotten, the ones that have been more successful, is that how the initial meeting really went?
No, because generally I like to see your use of proceeds or something
I see.
at the
Okay.
end, because to really see whether or not they have any idea what they're doing. They want to only raise $250,000, and I obviously can tell it's going to take $1 million to get to where they need to be.
I got it.
Then that tells me they haven't really thought through everything. Now they come in and tell me they want $2 million, and I don't think they need anywhere near that. That tells me something else. But I like to see your use of proceeds.
And I think, but I will say this though, John, to your point, okay, is I have sometimes sat through, I'm not big on going through a pitch deck. I was always like, let's just talk about your business. And I'll tell you, within 10 or 15 minutes, I'm thinking, this guy is really good and he knows what he's doing. And this is and I can see people buying this, whoever the quote people are, right? And then I'm in. All right. So that quick. And then you go through then maybe we'll go through a little bit more detail on the pitch deck and things, but boy, it's more a conversation. But you're right. You don't have to ask. It's like, well, I'm thinking to myself, how can I get in this deal? I met Tom Noonan at a TER function, okay, Technical Executive Roundtable, when he first came back to town. And I talked to him for 5 minutes before I was president of it then. And he told me what was going on. He told me about Chris and all this, really quick. And off he went. And he stayed in the meeting and said he's raising money. I called him the next day at 11 o'clock in the morning. And he said, yeah, we don't really need any money from you. We got SIG and we got this VC in already. They're already talking. And I'm like, God, I was like 2 hours late. But I knew just meeting him, this is going to be great. I'll never forget that feeling I had. So I'm with you, John.
The ones that I find are like that, the ones that play hard to get and really have something, they turn you guys on more than anybody I know. I say,
Yeah.
I said,
scarcity plays,
unbelievable. I mean, it's like,
But those are so rare.
they are rare. One way to get that feeling though is that they're early, they have a product, or they have a great idea. But if they could get three or four folks from the prospective customer base they've got to basically almost like give them a testimonial. Like if you had this product, I would buy it and I'd pay for it. And what you love is I'd pay basically what you're suggesting that you're basing your forecasts on. You can get 3 or 4 of those folks, which this guy that I talked about earlier that could walk into the place and just he could get those. If you can get those, I mean, that's gold. And it's even better when they've signed up as a beta. It's best if they signed up as a paying customer. But even if it's just, we got that problem and there's no solution out there, and if you add this solution, man, we pay for it. And not.
That's a hard one to believe, though, John. I got to tell you, from an investor standpoint,
I know.
I mean, it's easy for people. It's like going to angels and they're not going to tell you the truth. Buyers are liars. Okay, I mean, that's just the way it is. I just want to get rid of this guy. So that is a tough one. I mean, if you have beta customers or you got somebody paying something, it's helpful.
The key is, I think, paying something too, because having a free beta is just, that's nothing. You can sign it up and then there's nothing that comes of it. That's part of the problem. There are some funds around, and these are great people, but they have connections to corporates. It's fantastic. They gotta, you say, right. Oh, I met with XYZ big company, and they think it's a great idea. Well, so have they bought it? No, well, they haven't bought it yet. That's like,
no, they don't know what it takes to sell to a big company either, which is a very complex sale. But Sig, what about the, John tipped his hand a little bit to this, but who do I talk to? I mean, John's got me all set up. I've done my 2 friendlies deals, and now I need to I'm ready to talk to other investors. How do I come up with a list, or how do I get introductions? What do I do? Because that's important here, because I want you to incorporate in this. Are all investors alike? Is money money?
No, all investors are not alike. Not all angels are alike. Not all VCs are alike. Well, I'm going to dump it back on John again, because I tell entrepreneurs when they ask me who they should be talking to, have you talked to your attorney? Because as John is so well connected in the community, he knows what VCs will look at what kind of deals. He knows what out-of-town VCs will look at what kind of deals in town. He'll know what angels will look at what kind of deal. And your attorney is not helping you get there, then you probably have the wrong attorney.
Yeah. That's really good. So a good attorney is going to be a pre-qualifier.
Yeah.
Save a lot of time. And time, what'd you say, John? Time kills all deals?
Time is the enemy of the deal.
Time is the enemy of the deal. That's perfect. So that's what you do with them, is you'll sort of go through you're a master connector. So you go through your database for whatever it is, who's ever raising the money, and say, okay, here's who you should be pitching to. And you'll put an introduction probably in an email to them.
I will. One thing it's easier said than done, because there are a lot of things that go on in the background, as you guys know about. I may think that you have money, and you may have money, but you also may have made a bunch of investments that are now going south, and you're going to have to reserve more capital. Or things may change in the partnership, and you're getting ready. You're 5 years into the fund, and you're out in fundraising, and fundraising is not really going well. So it could change the whole perspective and the ability of the fund to write a check. And so it's very challenging, especially in the current environment. This isn't the 1999s that we all went through when, if you put .com on it, everybody put money into it. So it's got to be much more challenging in finding even the angels that are interested in putting the money. They may be interested, but they're just much.
Why is it more challenging? Because the market has been increasing at an incredible rate, right? The returns on the public markets have been phenomenal. So why, I would think that would be less challenging. Why has it become more challenging?
I think there's at least 3 reasons. One reason is there's no longer any IPO escape hatch on this whole process. So I have seen some SPACs go out recently, but that's basically it. Who else can go out in a market that's doing this, right? Up and down. So you're limited as far as who you can ultimately the investor can get an exit from. We've also seen a slowdown in private equity sponsors selling to other private equity sponsors. So that limits the exit strategy. So liquidity is challenging for a lot of these investors, and raising money is really hard. I was talking to 2 funds yesterday. They're out in fundraising mode, and they said, "Look, this is the hardest time we've had in the course of our fund. Trying to raise capital."
These are established funds. So this is their second, third fund or whatever.
Established funds. And they're they'll raise the capital. It's going to take a longer period of time. And we got a lot of calls from funds saying, can you introduce us to LPs? Can you introduce us to high net worth people? And we're happy to, in a very open way say, yeah, you come to town and get a group of people together, sit around a table and tell them about your fund. I mean, I did it about a month ago and it was great because it gave people an ability to see a small fund and what they were looking to raise, but it's a hard road right now. So
wow. So you got to have the harder the road, the better the business has to be, the better business opportunity. Yeah. And better the entrepreneur. I mean, it all plays into it.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are not going to get funded. They're just going to limp along.
That's the way it is. I mean, I saw a great presentation yesterday. The ATDC showcase, SIG was there, and you see a great presentation from a young entrepreneur that really knows their business, and it's really a B2C play, but you may have been there for this one, SIG, but it was really exciting, and the guy was super young, but really knew the problem and did a great job of presenting and had credentials coming out of his yin-yang. I mean, just had everything. But I'm thinking he's just not going to be in the sweet spot of a lot of the pure B2B investors. And I think he's going to be very successful. In 1999, people be throwing money at him. In the current environment, it's harder to find. We have to find that unique angel that says, yeah, I believe in this guy and I believe in the market he's in. It's just a harder road now.
Yeah, well, the whole B2C versus B2B is really hard here in Atlanta because we are a B2B town. And the B2C had always been a challenge to get funded.
But the B2C takes an enormous amount of money to get to profitability,
Yeah.
How do you reach all the C's? That takes enormous amount of the marketing dollars to get there. And so we've always come out of the B2B saying, I like rifle shot marketing. It works good. I know who to call.
Right.
Who are those 5 customers that I'm going to go after? That kind of thing.
And the other side, I always try to do a B2B to C. That helps some, but you still got the C component of it, what makes it challenging. As John said, you just got to find the right person who generally will be somebody who really knows that market, who maybe have been an executive in that market or something, and he understands it, and he not necessarily looking for a total financial gain, but he also looking to give back some. Therefore, he might be willing to take a bigger gamble than, say, somebody like me who is really looking at it just from a pure financial sense.
Well, here's the next black hole. The first one was, okay, so now I know I want to raise money and I got check boxes on that one all checked off. And then the next one is, how do I raise money? So I now have been through that process. And then you get to the last one is, oh my God, Charlie he's interested in this. How do I get to a deal to get the money? So SIG, same thing. Now, so the question to you, SIG, is how do you get from, all right, let's go forward with this. I want to invest money in this deal. And I do believe that, this first bit of money should be a $500,000 raise. We agree with that. I see the milestones. I believe it. Where do you go? Now what? I'm the entrepreneur. First time, now what? What goes on?
Well, assuming that I have done most of my due diligence, not necessarily all of it, I would put a term sheet on the table. First, I would talk to the entrepreneur about the general direction of the terms, i.e., maybe where valuations I'm looking at the range, just to see that we are in somewhat of the same range. Because an entrepreneur is looking for a $20 million valuation pre-money, and I'm thinking of 5. I doubt that we'll get together.
So that's the first cut point.
Right. And
we have to agree on pre-money valuation.
No, you have to agree on the range. Because
what does that mean? What range? Give me the 20 and 5 example. Tell me range.
Okay, 20 and 5 would be one range, and that would be a no-go for me. I wouldn't even bother to waste my time trying to negotiate. If the entrepreneur were at 9 and I were at 5, then we probably have a reasonable opportunity to figure out how to come to a compromise.
Okay.
So I would probably put a term sheet on the table, and then he would go talk to John about the term sheet and about what he didn't like about the term sheet, and John would tell him what John didn't like about the term sheet, and they would come together and come back with a counter term sheet, and then we would negotiate that.
Well, help me with this. Tell me when, it's not like you go through the term sheet dictionary and just choose all kinds of different instruments and different stocks and all. What do you find yourself doing, say, in these first round type deals, okay, these seed deals? What is your term sheet? A term sheet, basically, if I don't know, it's basically an investor saying, trying to come to agreement, say, well, here's the deal, me putting in money, you taking the money, here's what I get, here's what you get. Okay, that's basically a term sheet.
Right.
Okay, so what's in the term sheet besides valuation is what we're saying.
Well, it depends on whether or not it is a convertible note or a SAFE agreement or equity. Because, and it,
we'll talk through those,
okay,
and where you sort of came from, okay, on this as an investor.
On the convertible note, a lot of angels don't like convertible notes. They really want to know what they own in a company. I would
define what it is first, and then tell me
convertible,
why they don't like it.
a convertible note is a loan that will automatically convert to equity when you raise your equity round. And there will be certain terms in that convertible note. They'll have an interest rate, a maturity date, and a discount to valuation, and then there'll be a valuation cap.
Okay.
So you have those four components of a convertible note, in addition to the amount, of course. And so you'll think that the entrepreneur is really early, because trying to raise an equity round can really discourage an entrepreneur if he has to give up too much of the company. Mm-hmm. And if he's raising $2 million and the company only worth $5 million, he may feel like he's giving up too much. Right. And if I happen to agree with him, then I would look at doing a convertible note that would convert at a point when he raised money later.
So you're willing to buy in at a higher valuation at a discount if you could find investors at that valuation.
Right, at a later date that he make progress.
I got it. Okay.
Now, a SAFE agreement is somewhat very similar, except you do not have a maturity date. See, with convertible
or note, interest, you don't have interest either, do you?
No. But with a convertible note, you have like a 2 or 3 year maturity date. That if the entrepreneur hasn't done something by that point, you have the right to call the note and ask to be repaid. Or you can negotiate with the entrepreneur about why you should extend the note.
Right. And SAFE note?
A SAFE note had no maturity date. You were in an agreement to buy equity at some point, but the point it would be defined if you raise equity. But if you never raise equity after you do a SAFE note, that note just sits there.
Gaining no value. You put in $1, it's $1 for 5 years if you didn't raise it, right?
Yeah, but you hope that the value of the company increases, but there's no guarantee of that. And then on the equity side, you actually go in and negotiate. You figure out a valuation on the business. You figure out how much you're going to put in and how much of the business you want to own, and then you negotiate that in the term sheet.
Yeah, but stock isn't stock. It's not simple. Like it's all common stock and we're all the same. Were you a common stock buyer at those times?
No. And it gets even more complicated because you got preferred, you got non-participating preferred, you got participating preferred, and then you go from there to all the other terms that can be associated with equity. Anywhere from liquidation preference to...
Okay, John, this is where you take over. So what are you advising the entrepreneurs here when, Sig starts throwing out all these terms written down on this fancy term sheet of his, okay?
Yeah.
So he agreed to the $20 million valuation. but he's got a 5-time preference. He's got all this stuff. So go ahead. Why don't you talk about those different types of stock, if you will, and those different preferences?
We had a great discussion the other day, by the way, Charlie. I think, Sig, you were there. I know we had one of my colleagues we're all actively in this area, and we had a venture capitalist across the table, and they really did a deep dive on this stuff. And I thought, Sig, they did a nice job. But let me hit the rewind button just a second to say that this whole notion of the simple agreement for future equity, the SAFE, is supposed to be simple, right? It was created sort of out of the West Coast. And you mentioned, as correctly as it is, there's generally no interest component. But what we have found is people sometimes will noodle around with that document. Okay, it's supposed to be a standard document, and they'll start adding stuff to it. And that, again, is a big problem. We just inherited one recently where, it's an issue, right? It's not intended to be like that. It's like a motorcycle, and you attach a trailer hitch to it. Now you're pulling a trailer along behind a motorcycle. It's just, you can do it, but it's not going to work very well. You're going to be weaving around all over the place. So
it's a safe note plus a side deal.
Right. And the same thing with convertible notes. This is stuff that requires somebody that really knows how to run the numbers on this, because these convertible notes, as Sig well knows, when you inherit a company, and we've all seen these, where they have convertible notes at different levels, at different caps. I mean, the terms, trying to work a waterfall. Back to the earlier question, what's the lesson? The lesson learned is keep your cap table clean, right? And if you don't,
what does that mean?
It means don't overcomplicate the situation, and probably consult your lawyer. And if you have an accountant or fractional CFO, when one of the investors wants to come in and noodle around with the documents, and sometimes you just have to say no. Look, we can't do that. It's going to overcomplicate the situation and create problems. And Sig, I don't know, you may see this too, especially where you're an investor and another party wants to come in and invest, but they want to change the terms of the note, let's say, the convertible note. I'm sure you probably have to put your foot down from time to time on those situations as well.
Right, but at the same time, John, I can think of one in particular where the new investor came in and wanted to change the term of the convertible note. And he said, you either take it or leave it. And when the company has no money, what do you do as an investor in the company? You are not willing to put more money into it. And so sometimes you just have to give. It's like, it was funny because the VC who did that to me became one of my best friends. But he wasn't my best friend that day that he came in and basically took away all my discount privileges, took away my interest, and just said, you're going to be just like you invested up, but you put your money in 18 months ago.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good point. It has to do with negotiating strategy. So let me answer Charlie's question, which I think is, now we've got equity there. We've got a term sheet. We have what's called structure. And structure means, what are all the other things around, the restrictions, the covenants, the requirements that are in place that are going to impose some structure on the entrepreneur, right? The thing that you look for more than anything else when you're representing the company is, can you get more than one term sheet? Can you get a little? Can you get
really? I love that.
Right? Who else can you get? Can you get Uncle George to put a term sheet on the table?
Now Uncle George is the hero all of a sudden here.
Uncle George partners somebody that's willing to put a term sheet that's legitimate. It's why we frequently say, look, yes, it's great to go out there and get a term sheet, but man, if you only have one, we all know it's a supply demand thing. So sometimes we'll say, look, don't press if you can keep it work it a little bit before you push somebody to the point where you're going to get the term sheet. That's hard, because most of the time these companies are, as we all know, cash strapped. They want to get the capital, and they're willing to sign up for just about anything. And this still can work out. Some of the people I've referred to in my examples, I could tell you that worked out fine for them. They ended up giving the entrepreneur a lot of equity, but they were still okay with that. So looking at the structure, one of the things that we have a benefit for, and this isn't so much a sales pitch for my firm, but we collect term sheets. The firms collect term sheets for like 30 years from every deal they've done.
Wow.
So they got a repository that's a killer repository. So we have somebody says, oh, we always do it this way, or this is the way everybody does it, or nobody does it any other way. We used to sort of lick our finger and say, well, instinctively, we don't think that's right. Now we can say, let me tell you what it's like. Let me tell you what other people are doing, right? Now, the West Coast is different from the East Coast, but still, having that kind of data is super helpful. And it does give you a good idea. But it's really hard to go and say, for the entrepreneur to say, well, look, we want to do it this way. And if the investor says, look, this is the way we do it, and we've been doing this way for the last 5 deals, and we're not doing it differently. I mean, it's unless you got some.
No, the money has the power, right? The money has the power.
Unless you have multiple term sheets, and if you get the
Yeah.
multiple term sheets, but that's the exception in the current environment as opposed to the rule.
But John, let me ask you a question. How do you view a SATE agreement versus a convertible debt? You are, advising a client, and they are wanting to, let's say that the investor had proposed a convertible note agreement, but the entrepreneur thinks a SATE agreement is better. How do you distinguish between those?
Interestingly, and again, my colleagues who are a little bit more down on the on the street level see this every day.
Yeah.
But generally, the entrepreneur's position is exactly as you presented it, which is the SAFE is simple. It's supposed to be simple. It's presumably more equity, more focused on the entrepreneur. It doesn't require as much complexity. It's uniform. So therefore, it's going to make life easier. So the entrepreneur is generally going to push for the safe. It's not always the best position, especially if the investor says, I want to add interest in that, or I want to start adding bells and whistles to it. It really disrupts that document. So in that case, looking at the convertible is a better arrangement. Wherever we can do it, we'd love to try to get a price round if we can get a decent price out of this thing too, just keeping the cap table straight. What probably concerns us more than anything else, Sig, is where we have a situation that somebody has gone, they got safes, they got convertibles, they've got common stock. And we look at the cap table, and the biggest problem is we can fix it. Just like if somebody came in to the hospital and they had all these broken bones, the doctors are skilled to fix it. It's just that it's going to take time and money, and the recuperation period's not going to be short. Yeah. And so we just try to keep
a lot of relationships and expectations. Yeah.
Right. Keep it as simple. Generally, it's unless they have a lot of money or parents that are willing to pay a whole lot of money to clean it up, and say, keep it as simple as we can. It's going to make it a lot easier. Back to the notion that time's the enemy of the deal and the financing. If we got to go clean this thing up, it causes the prospective investor.
Like to me, though, John, what you're promoting is to say the simplest deals are going to be priced rounds. If you got a priced round, then the deal's done, right? I mean, the cap table's straightforward. There isn't a whole lot to calculate. There might be some preferences on that particular equity, that preferred equity or whatever, and it might have a coupon to it or whatever. But you know what it is. There's no backlog of safe notes and convertible debt and everything and equity. I mean, that's where it gets into, you need a PhD to kind of figure out who's going to get paid when and how it's all going to work.
I think the short answer to that is yes. I mean, if you can get the right valuation and you got a hot company, you can take some structure out, and you got competitive term sheets out there. Yeah, I mean, you skip some of the complexity. You also just don't have to worry about this more complicated cap table where somebody later does get equity and turns out to be a real thorn in your side.
Well,
go ahead.
I would challenge that a little bit in the sense that you can do an equity round and you can have some in other items besides valuation, i.e. liquidation preference, board approvals, and board members and things like that. And then when you go to raise your next round, whoever is coming up doesn't like what you did in your round, and you wind up having to redo part of the round to take the new money. I had that happen to me early on in my career, and that's why I went to more of a entrepreneurial friendly term sheet that I was using, because I didn't want to have to argue with the VCs about, I had a 2x liquidation preference. Well, when they came in, they weren't necessarily looking for a 2x, but they weren't going to give me 2x. So they said you had to give up your liquidation preference in order to get the new money, or maybe I had to give up, some sort of drag along right or something. They were any number of things that you could do. And so I went to using more of an entrepreneur VC friendly type term sheet that I felt good that the round would not have to be redone when a VC came in.
Yep.
That makes sense. One thing is, I think all of this speaks to, if you want to be a happy entrepreneur and you really want happy investors, all you have to do is hit your milestones using the money that you said you would need to hit the milestones. So if the business is outrunning your projections, everybody's happy and the cap table stays really clean. Okay. Yeah. They're all up rounds. There's always a lot of demand for the stock. It's a wonderful thing. But when you run into, which is, I'd say, a good 90% of the time you run into problems, then you really have John sitting at a table with a bunch of guys like me and Sig saying, no, let me help me here. Okay. Yeah. Help me get to a deal.
No, I agree, but I do want to just re-emphasize something that John said a minute or two ago. The presentation that his partner made at the ATDC showcase the other day, a couple of days ago, were one of the best slide and panel presentations that I have seen on term sheets and terms and everything. They kept it simple, straightforward, and everything.
That is hard to do. That's great.
It was, and they just sat there and talked about, because they would put up there, say convertible note versus SEEK. And then they would sit there and talk about the pluses and the minuses, and kept it simple and straightforward for the entrepreneur. I thought it was great. And
good stuff.
John, if we could see copies of that, and it would be wonderful. I just thought it would.
If you want, John, I could attach it to when we publish this. We could do that too.
I just thought it was really good.
I'll get that. The thing that was really good about it, thank you, Sig, for that, because that was my colleague, Zach Crow, and it was Steve Hasty from Circadian. But one of the things that was so good about it is both those guys are like in the trenches every day, every day on these things. And so they know what current market is. And rather than spending all this time trying to get to the equilibrium, they get there fast.
Yeah.
They get there really, really fast. And
That's great.
I appreciate that. And, we ought to do that might be worthy of a podcast too, Charlie, for one of your future sessions, because I think you'd enjoy hearing from them as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. One last question around this, just to finish off the fundraising, how to close the investors. I always hear entrepreneurs, every entrepreneur, without exception, saying, I want to stay in control of my company. And they think, in simplest terms, these are first-time fundraisers, simplest terms, as long as I have at least 51% of the company, I'm in control of the company. Talk to that, both of you guys, one as investors, one as the lawyer for the lawyer representative of the entrepreneur. Go ahead, Sig.
Well, they may think they are in control, but ultimately they are not in control.
Really?
Well,
okay.
It depends. Particularly if they have done an equity round. Call it part of the equity round. You put limitations in place to what the entrepreneur can do without the approval of the board or without the approval of the majority of shareholders. And those can cover anything from how much debt you can borrow to how much pay you can pay yourself, to where you can raise more money or not raise more money, how many people can be on the board, who can be on the board, liquidation preferences that impact.
So this is sort of like, I can do anything I want. I'm in control as long as I meet all of these constraints.
That, right. And that is what an equity round does. You can put some of those in a convertible note. You don't generally see many of them in a SEEK agreement.
John, tell me, Is this a surprise to entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think the entrepreneurs
When
do.
these terms show up, do you go, I should have told you about that? What happens?
Now, I think one of the first things we say when they say we want to maintain control of the company is we say, well, listen, here's the deal. The investor does not want to take control of your company. That's not their objective, right? That's not what, now it may happen, but that's not what they're planning to do. They're not going to run a midnight coup and take over the business, and you can't get into the office or log into your computer. But they're going to have protective provisions there, and these are and the ones that are market. We're going to tell you about, and if they go beyond market, we're going to ask them why they're doing it. What's the reason? What's the motivation? But you need to be aware of the fact that they're in a business, and if you're not performing, they're going to find a way to either help you, and if you're not listening, they're going to find a way to replace you. And it's the way it is. They're running a business, and you need to understand that going in. They're not
And
there.
you're taking other people's money. That's
Taking
just
other
the way
people's
it
money.
is. Yeah, it's not your business. It is now our business.
Right.
And the money has the power. Really does. Yeah.
Right. And back to the divorce analogy, not to stretch that too much, but it's like, they can divorce you and throw you out of the house, but you can't divorce them and throw them out of the house. So, it'll be a situation where, you might be gone, but you're not getting rid of them in this situation unless they want to be gone. And so just be aware of that scenario. And these are protections that they need to have.
Well, last piece on this, guys, because we've been at this for a while, and I appreciate all this time that you're giving to our audience and to me. Is we talk about, is your house in order, legally speaking? So, just to kind of summarize that, from your side, what are you looking for to make sure the house is in order, Sig, legally speaking? Then, John, you can finish it up, and we'll call it a day here.
Well, basically, you want to be sure that everything's been disclosed about the company. So you go through, or you have your attorney go through the legal docs to make sure they are validly incorporated, to make sure that meeting minutes have been provided, to be sure that they haven't been things that been approved by the board that nobody told you about. You want to be sure that they have customer and contract obligations, that you know what obligations you are signing up to fulfill. And so a good attorney that represents the investor will have a checklist of things that he wants to see and take a look at. Now, the younger the company, the quicker you can get through due diligence, because they are not near as many things to look at. You want to look at lease agreement. Have they signed a lease for a whole floor of a building somewhere for 10 years that they forgot to tell you about? Those are the kind of things that you are checking on in legal due diligence.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
I just mentioned 3 or 4 here that are pop up. The cap table is sort of the first place we go and see what it looks like and clean it up. Ownership on the IP side, and that also, if they do anything offshore, this is a real consideration. Just about everybody's doing something offshore, and the laws in other countries are very different. And securing that is a big problem. The determination of independent contractor versus employee both relates to ownership. Basically, if you're an employee within the work context of your work, the company owns it. If you're an independent contractor, the contractor owns it. So getting assignments in place. And then the idea of the employment laws with respect to, have you paid your people fairly, especially in the hybrid world? Are they exempt and excluded from overtime or not? And there's a big problem there. And then finally, taxes. This comes in more when people have actually been, had revenue, but have they been paying sales tax? Is this going to become an issue? Have they been paying taxes at all if they're making money? A lot of times we find people that have just ignored a lot of this stuff, cleaning it up. I'd say one other area that was really hot now, the AI and the privacy area. Have you been following the privacy laws? They're very complicated right now. It's very unfortunate.
I can't even imagine.
There's no uniformity. There's no uniformity in any state or government or country or whatever. And then the AI laws, there's a European AI directive. So if you're selling into Europe, you got an AI directive, which is a uniform set of laws. We don't have that here. And so there's a whole lot of risk analysis that we would look at from a diligence standpoint. It still may not stop Sig and Charlie from investing, but you want to know about it. And when you go to sell the company, you're probably indemnifying over it. The myriad of issues has grown dramatically and exponentially over the last probably 5 to 10 years.
Well, thanks, guys. So for the first-time entrepreneur who this is intended to, who's going to be raising funds, going through, should I be raising? How do I raise? And then how do I kind of get to a deal with investors? And now with you finishing up with the words like indemnity, okay, and control and representation, this is something you really do have to have. I always look and you really have to have really good legal counsel, okay, who's advising you. And you've always done a great job there, John. But it's really helpful to have very experienced angels, okay, who are there in the trenches with you to help you succeed. So that team pulled together can make all this complexity work. And your job as an entrepreneur is to build a great business, okay, and hoping you're protected on both sides. So you guys certainly do that. And I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. This has been spectacular. And I hope maybe what we'll do is do a follow-up with your partners there and talk about the individual equity and other instruments that debt and equity instruments that these guys might be talking through and might be available. But thank you so much. And I appreciate your help and time.